What's up, everybody? Back with another review. This time it's a movie called The Torturer, and this is directed by Joe Manco, written by Paul Kane, and in this instance, I'll also mention edited by Catalina Querida, and I apologize, Catalina, if I'm butchering that. I only mention that because I sort of know Catalina through the online horror community, and in particular, I kind of got acquainted with her a little bit through the Last Drive-In Mutant family. And if you're part of the Mutant family, or even just the online horror community in general, you know that these are a swell bunch of very enthusiastic, genuine horror fans. So naturally, when I found out that one of them had made a movie of their own, I was very curious to check it out. So this movie is based on a short story, not that I'm going to pretend to have read it in this case, where a man named Andy wakes up in a cell and he finds himself being interrogated for information on what he doesn't know. He scarcely even seems to remember who he is himself. He's starting at point blank, just the same way we are. And this certainly isn't the first film to open that way, but it's always a premise that I find interesting. It is always a lot of fun to be discovering a story right along with a character. It's just a really simple, deft way of putting you right in their psychological seat. And going right along with that, this whole movie has a very expressionistic vibe in terms of how it's filmed and produced. Set decoration is at times very minimal, to the point where sometimes it honestly is just characters on a black background or all but swallowed up in shadows. And in that regard, besides reminding me of the classic German expressionism, it also harkens back to the approach that a lot of the old classic film noirs had. Like, you go back and you watch, even as an example, that famous torture scene in the old noir film The Big Combo, and while that guy's getting the screws put to him, you just have a black background. And there's a lot of other examples I could list, but as I mentioned to someone in my previous review, name dropping all day just kind of makes me feel like a wank, so I'm not going to bother. I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you're a bit of a film fan and you know about everything that I've mentioned, so we'll just leave it at that. You also get instances where characters are speaking directly to the camera. It sort of reminds me a little bit of the kind of technique that Jonathan Demme always used to use so well. And breaking the fourth wall like that obviously is a very bold move. You have to be very careful with that approach. But what made it feel fresh to me in a couple of instances was that even when certain characters were looking directly at the camera, their face, or at least their eyes, were always kept in shadow, which made everything feel just a little bit more sinister. And again, it gives you a better idea of what the lead character is seeing when people are looking at him in a threatening way. And from a writing perspective, the screenplay manages to do some interesting things within the relatively short 40-minute runtime. This is one of those movies like the old John McTiernan film Basic, or more recently Power of the Dog, where half of the pleasure comes from waiting for the next reversal in the story. There were a couple of times where I thought I had a decent idea of where it was going, and then the movie manages to spin it on its head and take me somewhere else. In one or two instances, I think you could probably anticipate what's coming, but that doesn't bother me. I don't think that's really anything I can criticize in this case because it is set up well by everything that comes before it. Without getting too specific, because again, I don't want to spoil too much, every twist in the story is very carefully and very deliberately prepared. And this is one of those films where I feel like every time I go back and watch it again, I'll appreciate how everything is set up and prepared even more. I also enjoyed the performance of the titular torturer. That doesn't exactly slip off the tongue like silk does it, the titular torturer. I dare you to see how fast you can say that without tripping up. But he's very good because his approach is to be calm and quiet the whole time. Again, there are deeper reasons, I think, why this character is behaving that way. But, the point is that I always enjoy it when a character like this is able to have calm moments or just a general sort of calm demeanor. Because it's one thing if you're being interrogated or tortured and, you say, up yours, man, I'm not going to tell you shit. And the person gets mad because, yeah, he's going to get mad. He's trying to get information out of you and you're resisting. But it's another thing if you refuse him like that and his response is simply to sit there and just kind of very calmly sort of be like, when you get a response like that in that situation, that's when you know you fucked up big time. And while his methods of torture aren't especially elaborate or creative. Like, we're not talking jigsaw here. There was one technique that I thought was surprising and forthright at the same time. And he takes nails and, rather than just driving the nails through someone's hand, he drives them right underneath our protagonist's fingernails. And speaking for myself, I'm not the kind of person who gets especially grossed out by someone being amputated or getting their head cut off or guts spilling, the same way that I'm not especially grossed out when I injure myself in a more major way. But if anything happens around my fingers, there's just something about that that just absolutely makes my skin crawl. It almost felt like that particular torture was made just for me. I don't know. Do you guys know something I don't? So if anyone out there does feel like they need to torture me for any reason, nails under my nails. Wow, I just got that. Nails under my nails is the way to go if you want to get what you're looking for. And the practical gore effects are well utilized here. There's not like an overabundance of them. Again, this isn't like a torture porn movie despite the title. It's just enough to make an impression and keep the story moving. And then conversely, there's some dream sequences where things do get a lot more grotesque. I also really enjoyed those dream sequences just because in a movie like this, the way it initially started, I wasn't expecting that. It sort of reminds me of some of those surreal touches that Fulci would just kind of throw into his movies sometimes just out of the blue. And it's also the tip-off that there is more to this seemingly simple premise than meets the eye. Again, at the risk of sounding redundant, I will leave that for you to discover. What I can say is that there's a couple instances where there's hints that dreams and reality are becoming blurred and sort of melting together, but it's all written and edited together with enough purpose and restraint that it never feels like it's being done in a frenzied fashion just to distract you from a lack of substance. And I also just like the general sort of brooding, grimy atmosphere. Like, this almost feels like it could be happening like a block or two down the street from the events of the first Terrifier movie. I also really like the one line that the torturer has where he explains to the protagonist that he has to pick one side or another, and also adds that he's not a patient man. And for me, that just felt very reflective of our contemporary discourse culture online, how things are just getting progressively coarser, and it seems to be more and more defined by picking a side. And if, one person doesn't pick your side, you're going to attack them. I could be wrong about that, but it felt vaguely topical without trying too hard to be topical. And that speaks to the whole movie for me. I really liked that it had enough restraint and trust in its viewer to not absolutely beat you over the head with everything. Except for the beatings to the head that our protagonist takes, of course. I mean, man, oh man, he suffers more head trauma than the wet bandits. I don't really have any gripes with this one. I mean, honestly, it's hard to have gripes with a short film, especially one that has this much promise. I mean, I guess if I was gonna get really, really, really super goddamn nitpicky, maybe you could crank up the volume on a couple of the beatings a little bit so that the physical blows sell a little bit better. But again, that is just a mere blip. And with the firm grasp that this team clearly has on the expressionistic aesthetic, I would be very curious to see if they have a good film noir up their sleeve. I'm certainly not a shot caller, but if my opinion counts for anything, I think a good modern noir is right in your wheelhouse. It's free to watch on Tubi, and again, it is short. So at the end of the day, if you're part of the mutant family or if you're part of the online horror community, I mean, just show it your support. It's not going to take up much of your time, and I think you'll come away from it pleasantly surprised. And speaking of pleasant surprises, I will also just quickly say to everybody, thank you so much for all the positive attention that my last couple of videos have gotten. It is seriously way beyond anything that I would ever want, ask for, or expect at this stage of my channel's development. Not only did you guys give me just the boost I needed, but you even gave me a boost I didn't know I needed. I love all of you. You guys absolutely make this worth doing every time. So that's all I have for this one. I cannot wait to see what else our little community churns out next. Stay tuned for more material very soon, and I will catch you all later.